Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for checking out MTGRocks.com. My name is Alan. Today, we have our very first recap of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty previews. Yesterday was the preview stream, the very first kickoff stream for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and boy, oh boy, was it a fantastic one. I think, in my opinion, probably the best set reveal stream that Wizards of the Coast has ever done. There was a lot to cover. They dropped a ton of cards and a ton of information. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over the previews that came out yesterday between the stream as well as the ones dropped from other influencers and sites around the community. So what we're going to do is we're going to look here at the MTGRocks preview gallery, and we'll just kind of go through each of the colors, talk a little bit about each of them, and yeah, so let's get into it. So first off here we have, so there were a bunch of different sagas that were kind of shown off yesterday during the preview stream. So kind of at the beginning, they had a bunch of different ones, different rarities. So they had common, uncommon, rare, and mythic level sagas. Most of them are not too noteworthy, I would say. But this one here, so let's look at the first one, Michiko's Reign of Truth. And then on the backside, we have Portrait of Michiko. And this is an interesting one because this kind of feels a bit like ethereal armor, sort of, mixed with like all that glitters. So kind of an interesting one. It potentially could find its home in kind of the Azorius enchantment decks, the Voltron style decks in historic or potentially like something pioneer or modern potentially. But very interesting card. And again, we won't go through all of the sagas if they're not really of note, but this one was pretty interesting. The next one here, Era of Enlightenment. Again, this one's, again, nothing too crazy. This is definitely a good draft card. Nothing too fancy here. Yeah, no real notable effects. But one of the big things that was shown off, and we had seen this kind of show up before in the past, was the dragons, the new dragon spirit cycle. So AO, the Dawn Sky, is our white dragon. It's 5 mana, 5/4 with flying and vigilance. When it dies, you get to choose, look at the top 7 of your library. And you can put a non-land permanent, or any number of non-land permanents, I should say, with total mana value of 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. And then put the rest in the bottom of your library in any order, or you can put 2+1/+1 counters on each permanent control that is a creature or a vehicle. So this card is very good. This card is kind of like it's kind of like a collected company essentially, right, in white. So very cool card. Decent body as well too, decent stat line. We also got to see the borderless treatment of AO the Dawn Sky, which looks incredible. So definitely a really cool card there. We also saw Shrines make a return. So Go Shintai of Shared Purpose. So we only seen the white one. We don't have the other colors yet, but Shrines are back. They are now legendary creatures as well. Go figure. Who knew? So that's cool. That means that we're getting a third cycle of Shrines, which means that I think the Shrine tribal decks in in historic and potentially in like maybe pioneer, not pioneer, it would be probably have to be modern. They have an option now. You could also, we're starting to also get towards a point in time now where 5-color, maybe not Shrine tribal, but if there's an 5-color enchantments deck, we have more shrines to go into that deck, which is probably something we would want. So very cool to see. Next up, we had the Wandering Emperor. Now, this may look like a familiar Planeswalker. It's because it's the Wanderer. The one that we knew from War of the Spark. We finally get to see her face. We get to see what she looks like. And a little bit of a lore thing. Spoiler alert. She's the Emperor of Kamigawa. Disappeared. Turned into a Planeswalker. So, she is apparently having a hard time controlling her planeswalking powers, her spark. That's why we never really see her for too much. She shows up in one place and then kind of leaves. So she's got Flash, 4 mana for a 3 loyalty. She's got Flash. And then as long as the Wandering Emperor entered the battlefield this turn, you may activate her loyalty abilities anytime you could cast an instant. It's pretty strong. We've seen this kind of effect on other cards in the past. generally pretty strong, especially in things like Commander. Put her +1, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature, and it gains first strike until the end of turn. -1, you make a 2/2 white samurai with vigilance, and -2, exile target tapped creature, and you gain 2 life. Now, what we can do with this is kind of nuts. 1, we can flash it in. 2, it's a fantastic blink target because we can then activate her loyalty abilities again. So if, you know, our opponent attacks, we flash this in, we get to -2 and exile one of their tapped creatures, then we blink it, comes back in, exile another one of their tapped creatures. We just start to generate a ton of value off of this Planeswalker. Very, very cool. Definitely dig it. Really, really cool for white decks, kind of just giving another avenue for, I guess, your kind of like white style control, white taxes, almost kind of decks, maybe giving really playing to what that deck really would like to have, really making their creatures bigger, making them trade a little bit more efficiently, giving you free tokens that you can just kind of trade out when you need to block things, and then just being able to exile creatures. Pretty strong. We see 3 different versions of the Wandering Emperor here. So we have the regular base version here, the borderless version, which looks great, but then also the samurai, the samurai frame showcase. So there is also, we had the ninja frame showcase. We have also a samurai frame showcase, which looks incredible as well. Going to look great in foil, I'm sure. Moving on, we have Kyodai, Soul of Kamigawa, one that we've seen before as well. 4 mana, 3/3 with flash and flying. When it enters the battlefield, another permanent gains indestructible for as long as you control Kyodai. And then for Wooburg, Kyodai gets +5/+5 until the end of turn. Pretty average. I mean, I think it's a pretty average card, right? I think it's good. It's good, and it's going to probably see play in some kind of mid-range strategies. It's definitely good for that kind of thing. And I'm sure that there will be ways for us to utilize this Wooburg ability, ways to kind of generate that and make that happen a little bit easier. But even with that aside, it's a decent card on its own. So very cool. Next we have a Spirited Companion, the best Doge. 1/1 for 1 and a white, and when it enters the battlefield, draws a card. Best Elvish visionary of all time. Next up, we have Ancestral Katana. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you can pay 1 and you can attach Ancestral Katana to it, and it gets +2/+1 with a quick cost of 3. Kind of your average draft equipment, nothing too crazy there. Imperial Subduer, 2 and a white. Whenever a samurai where you control attacks alone, tap target creature you don't control. So it seems that the samurai/warrior theme is about attacking alone. Pretty interesting. We'll have to see if there's more support around that. And then lastly, in the white stuff here, we have Befriending the Moths and Imperial Moths. So just another common level saga. Nothing too crazy here. Giving something flying is pretty good, but nothing too fancy there. Let's go ahead and move on to the blue cards. Now we got some real spicy blue cards here. So first off, Thousand Face Shadow. We had seen this kind of card show up before. So 1 blue for 1/1 for a ninja, human ninja. It's got flying. It's also got ninjutsu. When it enters the battlefield, from your hand, if it's attacking, you can create a token that's a copy of another attacking creature that's also tapped and attacking, which is kind of crazy. We wrote a bit of an article about this card a little bit ago, so definitely check that out. There's a lot of opportunity for this card, especially in things like Commander would be insane. This could be seen as potentially something that could be seen in Modern. It's going to be a staple in kind of the ninja style decks. This is exactly what ninjas want to do. They want to be able to go wide, get in unblocked, and go from there. So next up, we have a common or saga, the Modern Age, and the Vector Glider on the backside. Nothing too crazy here, just looting, and then you get a 2/3 flyer. Next up, we have Kyrie the Swirling Sky. So this is another one of the dragon spirits that we saw. So Kyrie is a 6 mana 6/6 flying in Ward 3, which flying in Ward 3 we've seen as being a very powerful ability in the past. And then when Kyrie the Swirling Sky dies, we can either choose one of these two, return any number of target non-land permanents with total mana value 6 or less from to their owner's hands, which get to bounce some stuff. Or we mill 6 cards and then return 2 instants or sorceries from our graveyard to our hand. Generally a very strong card here. I kind of like the alignment of 6s here. Mana value 6 or less, milling 6 cards, 6/6 for 6. I dig it. I'm about it. This is a very cool card. Where this kind of fits in a home for constructed purposes. I mean, this could be kind of maybe a top end card for some style of control deck. Usually bouncing things is pretty strong. Again, the milling 6 cards is usually pretty good too. I don't know that there's a deck in my head that I would want to spend 6 mana on a dragon to mill 6 cards after it dies. I don't know, but we'll have to see there. I think we'll see some amount of play. Next up, we have Tezzeret, Betrayer of Flesh. So Tezzeret's back. So we have the 3 versions of Tezzeret here. So the normal version. Then we also have the Borderless and the Soft Glow Frame treatment. So Tezzeret is a 4-mana 4/4. And then he has a passive. The first activated ability of artifacts that you activate each turn costs 2 less to activate. Very strong. +1, draw 2, then discard 2 unless you discard an artifact. Very strong. -2, target artifact becomes a creature. If it isn't a vehicle, it has a base power of 4/4, which is pretty good. So you can start animating some of there's vehicles in this set as well. And then -6, you get an emblem with whatever an artifact you control becomes tapped, draw a card. Seems pretty good, especially when we have access to something like Paradox Engine and Historic. This could be there could be some kind of crazy artifact combo deck leveraging Tezzeret and his, the passive and the emblem in some capacity. So very cool there. Next up, we have Jin-Gitaxias Progress Tyrant. So we had talked about Jyngataxis making his return to Kamigawa. And we saw from the story chapters from chapter 2, there was a piece of artwork that showed him. There was a leaked card that showed actually the Phyrexian version of Jin-Gitaxias, and we had no idea what it was. And Wizards granted us the actual card here. So Jin-Gitaxias Progress Tyrant, 7 mana 5/5, so 5 and 2 blue for a Praetor, Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever you cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, you get to copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy, and it only triggers once per turn. Whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery, counter that spell, only triggers once per turn. So very hard to deal with because it requires your opponents to effectively 2-for-1 themselves to deal with Jin-Gitaxias. But at the same time, you also get to copy 1 spell a turn, which is pretty nuts, right? Like if you can keep some mana open and keep this guy around, you cast something on your turn, copy it. Cast something on your opponent's turn, copy that as well. You get to counter your opponent's first spell. That's pretty good. I would say that's pretty strong. So Jyngataxis is going to be an absolute all-star in Commander for sure. But this could have some application across Constructed, just given that these abilities are so darn powerful. We also see that there is the soft glow effect as well too here, the soft glow frame, in addition to the Phyrexian language frame. So very cool looking art. Wizards nailing it on these ones as well. Next up, we have the reality chip. So this is one of the new mechanics from Kamigawa Reconfigure. So this is an artifact creature. It's an equipment jellyfish. It's also a legendary, which is interesting. So I guess technically speaking, you could use this as your commander. Kind of cool. But it's 2 mana for a 0/4. And then you can look at the top of your library at any time, which is cool. And then as long as reality chip is attached to a creature, you can play lands and cast spells from the top of your deck. Pretty good, I would say, especially if you did want to make this as something like your commander, and allowing you to cast, counter magic or anything like that off the top of your deck seems pretty good. There is the regular version and the soft glow treatment as well. Next up, we have another saga. Behold the Unspeakable. So we know that the Unspeakable is an old card from Kamigawa, so this is kind of a retelling of that story. This is a pretty good one, I would say, but it's kind of weird of where this fits in. The fact that this is a blue one, a blue saga, is kind of weird. But it's creatures you don't control get -2/-0 until your next turn, which is pretty good. And if you have fewer cards in your hand, or if you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, draw 4 cards. Otherwise, draw 2, or scry 2, then draw 2. So that's also pretty good. But then on the third, it flips, and then it becomes a +1/+1 for each card in your hand. It has flying and trample, so pretty strong. I wouldn't say that this is going to be like massively constructed playable. Definitely a very strong draft card. Next up, we have Tamiyo's Completion 3 and a blue for a flash aura. Enchant artifact, creature, or planeswalker. When Tamea's completion enters the battlefield, tap enchanted permanent. If it's an equipment, you get to unattach it from a thing. Enchanted permanent loses all abilities and doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Pretty good, very good draft card, I would say. Deals with basically everything and anything you really want to deal with. But as far as the constructed application, probably just for commander. Nothing really fancy here. I mean, these kinds of style of enchantments really don't see a whole ton of play. So we'll see there, but probably not. Lastly, in blue, we have Covert Technician. So 2 in a blue for a 2/4 with ninjutsu for 2. Whenever Covert Technician deals combat damage to a player, you may put an artifact card with mana value less than or equal to that damage from your hand onto the battlefield. So kind of like a little mini ninjutsu. In this particular case, because if you're going to ninjutsu in, so you're going to put it in something that's cost 2 off of the first trigger. So what? You're probably putting in maybe an equipment. Maybe you're putting in a mana rock or something. This is commander purposes, right? But as you beef this up, you could start to put in some bigger, stronger artifacts, which is pretty cool. I think this is going to be a really good card. I mean, it's one of the the few cards in the grand scheme of Magic that have a very good ninjutsu effect. So I would say this is definitely going to see play in Commander for sure. We have the Ninja Showcase frame and the regular frame here as well. Cool. Moving on to black. All right, moving on to black, we have, first up, Life of Toshiro Uzawa and Memory of Toshiro, so a black saga here, uncommon. What's cool about this? There's nothing really fancy about this except for the fact that the first two chapters of the saga are the effects of Umezawa Jite. Very cool. It's kind of flavorful. This isn't the first time that we've seen something like this where Wizards has kind of taken the effects of Umezawa Jite and put it on other cards. So very cool to see here. But nothing really to, crazily write home about. Next up, we have Biting Palm Ninja. So we have 3 versions here, the regular version, plus the extended version, and the Ninja Showcase frame. This one is it enters with a menace counter on it, which is pretty good. And then when it deals combat damage to a player, you can remove the menace counter, but when you do, you get to discard a card from your opponent's hand. You basically kind of get to like Thought Season, which is pretty neat. But it's actually a little bit better. It's not just Thought Season. You do get to exile the card. So that's pretty good. As far as, we've seen some humans like there's a 2-mana human that does the same thing. I guess I forget where it was from Ixalan. But we've seen humans or creatures with these kinds of effects see play in the past. I think this is possible. This could see play in kind of the standard iteration or the alchemy iteration of ninjas. Sure, it's fine. Next up, Lethal Exploit. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Gets additional -1/-1 if for each modified creature you control as you cast the spell. So modified being a new mechanic as well. Modified being that equipment, creatures that have equipments on them, auras on them, or counters on them in some fashion, whether it's +1/+1, -1/-1, ability counters of that sort, all are modified. So a pretty decent removal spell. It's a potentially, depending on how many creatures that you have that are modified, could get up to -5/-5 levels of power. It seems pretty good. Probably a decent removal spell. It does deal with things like that are indestructible. It has the ability to kind of scale and deal with larger sized creatures. So not too bad. Next up, we have Dokuchi Shadowwalker. Nothing crazy here, just a 6-mana 5/5 with ninjutsu. And lastly, in black, we have Invoke Despair. So this is an interesting one. 1 and quadruple black for sorcery. Target creature or target opponent sacrifices a creature, and then if they can't, they lose 2 life. You draw a card. Then you repeat this process for a planeswalker and an enchantment. Very cool card. Kind of you get to 3, almost sometimes 4. You get to 3 for 1 at the very least. You get to 3 for 1 your opponent. You get to draw a card, and they either lose a bunch of life or they lose a lot of their permanents, and you get to draw some cards potentially along the way. Pretty interesting card. Not sure if quadruple black is really feasible to be played in constructed. I mean, possibly in some kind of a like mono black style or heavily black leaning control shell, maybe. But I don't expect us to see a ton of play. Moving on to red, we have quite a few here. You get a good number here. So, the Shattered States era and the Nameless Conquer is the common red, one of the common red ones. Again, this is a 5 mana saga, so I'm not really excited about this one. Pretty average abilities, gaining control of a creature, okay. Giving creatures +1/+0 until the end of turn, okay. And then it turns into a 3/3 trample with haste, nothing too fancy there. Next up, we have Goro, Disciple of Ryusei. So we have seen this card a little bit before as well. We've actually seen this version of the card. Now, Goro is a 2-mana 2/2 legendary creature, a goblin samurai, so it can be used as your commander. For 1 red, creatures you control gain haste until end of turn, which is a very powerful ability. And then for 3 and 2 red, you can make a 5/5 and activate only if you control an attacking modified creature, which my anticipation that if you're playing red, there's a good shot that you are going to have some amount of equipment or in there, also possibly some auras. You're probably going to have modified creatures, so pretty sweet commander. If anything, this being a red haste enabling creature for like very cheap cost is pretty good for it to probably see play across at least in commander, and oftentimes some of these creatures see play in various like combo decks where you're looking to OTK your opponent. So pretty good card. We should see some amount of play in some niche strategies, but then probably commander too. Next up, we have Aki War Paint, 1 red. Nothing crazy here. It's an artifact or creature, and then if it's a creature, it gets +2/+1. So you could put this on, say, like a vehicle, and then as that vehicle gets screwed, turns into a creature, it gets the +2/+1 benefit. Very cool. Next up, Aki Emberkeeper, 1 and a red. Whenever a non-token modified creature you control dies, you make a 1/1 spirit. It's a 2/1, nothing crazy there. Again, playing more into the modified stuff. Next up, Unstoppable Ogres, we get an artifact creature, Ogre Warrior, 4/1. When it enters the battlefield, target creature cannot block this turn. So a good draft card, I would say. But other than that, nothing crazy there. Next up, Simeon Sling. So 1 red for a 1/1. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever Simeon Sling or the equipped creature becomes blocked, it deals 1 damage to the defending player. And it has Reconfigure too. So I realized I didn't explain what Reconfigure meant and when we talked about the reality chip. So Reconfigure is a new kind of ability that either allows you to attach or equip this card to a creature or unattach it from that creature. But you can only do it as a sorcery. So you pretty much can have a creature. It almost feels like Bestow, if you will, from Theros, where you get more dual functionality out of these creatures, so they can beef up other creatures in play, or they can beef up other creatures in play, or they can become creatures themselves, which is a very interesting dynamic that we often don't see in Magic, right? It's just the artifacts are the equipment are the equipment, and the auras are the auras, and that's about it. So the very cool kind of mechanic. I think it's a little slow for what we need it to be, unfortunately, but still a very cool one nonetheless. Next up, we have a card. So this is in Spanish, I believe, but this should be Scrap Welder. So we have 2 frames here for the soft glow and the regular. Scrap Welder, 3 mana, 3/3, and so it has the ability of tap, sacrifice an artifact with mana value X, return target artifact card with mana value X or less than X from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it gains haste. So again, very cool kind of scrap or a Goblin Welder kind of style card, maybe a little bit Goblin Welder leveled up and got a little bit modern, and he can get some bigger, he can get some specific things out of the graveyard. It's a little bit more balanced. So pretty cool card. Probably there might, I don't know if in standard there's really anything that's really worth grabbing artifact creature wise. There may be something kind of coming up that there may be worthwhile grabbing, but we'll just have to see. This probably has some application across other formats though, so pretty cool. Moving on to green here. Not too much here in green. So the one of the sagas we have, Azusa's Many Journeys. So you can play it. So first off, this one allows you to play an additional land, and then it allows you to untap lands when the creature on the backside becomes blocked. Nothing crazy there. Next one, Teachings of Kieran. So 2 mana. So this one's a rare. So this one is mill 3 cards, and then you get to make colorless spirit creature or a colorless spirit creature token. You put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So still, again, doesn't sound very intriguing. Once you get to the back, we get a 1/1 that says when it attacks, we get to exile a creature from a graveyard and then make a spirit token, or exile a non-creature card from a graveyard and then put a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control. Kind of feels a bit like Scavenger Ooze or Scavenging Ooze. Just probably takes a little bit more work to get going. So I don't see. Maybe the see some amount of play, just feels a little bit slow to kind of deal with graveyard things that we really would want to be dealing with in a timely fashion. Next up, the Dragon Kami Reborn. So there's another rare green one. So this one is interesting. You gain 2 life, and then you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You get to exile one of them face down with a hatchling counter on it, and then put the rest on the bottom of your library. So you have to do that twice. Then when it flips, you get this Dragon Kami's Egg. When it dies, or a dragon you control dies, you can cast one of the creature spells from ones that you exile with the hatchling counters on it without paying its mana cost. So you could get some real value out of this. If you exile some big creature, you get to cast it for free. Very cool. Next up, Boseiju reaches skyward, an uncommon here. So this is pretty much just a kind of like a ramp style one. You search for basic forests. You put lands from your graveyard on top of your library, so you can kind of get more lands, and then the creature on the backside is a reach plant that gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Pretty average, good, decent for ramp strategy. So it's 4 mana, so you know who knows if whether or not it's worth it or not. There's probably other better things to do. Last up, Greater Tanuki, 6 mana, 6/5 with trample, and it has channel. So we see the return of channel from original Kamigawa. So a channel is you pay a cost, so you pay a mana value, and then you discard an additional copy of Greater Tanuki. Then you search for this instance, you search your library for basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped. Decent draft card. It's a common, so you can definitely draft multiples of them for the purposes of channel. We'll see channel actually come up here very shortly in one of the lands that we got spoiled here. Next on colorless, we have only a couple of entries here. Surge Hacker Mech. So a 4 mana 5/5 with menace crew 4 vehicle. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to twice the number of vehicles you control the target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So interesting, kind of like vehicle tribal support. Can one-shot a few different creatures if you have a bunch of different vehicles in play. This is probably a rare, draft rare only. I don't expect this to be a very good constructed playable vehicle. There have been some in the past that were good. This is probably not one of them. And then the other colorless card we have, which is really spicy, which is Mirror Box, 3 mana for an artifact. The legend rule does not apply to permanents you control. Pretty crazy. Each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1, and each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature. So if this basically incentivizes you to play a bunch of legendary permanents. This is going straight into the Bard class deck that I love in Historic. We're just going to pop off and go super wide with a bunch of legends. And this is awesome. Very, very cool card. We have seen other cards where that have these kind of effects. It has this effect where the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control, which is really cool. So really looking and kind of a nice callback to those cards. Especially I think one did come from Kamigawa in the past. Or pretty much I think all of them are like Kamigawa flavored or inspired cards. So very cool. Moving on, the multicolor stuff, we got some crazy multicolor cards here. So let's go ahead and we'll look at the, we saw these ones, the Kami War. Here we go. So this is one that we saw kind of previewed. It was a leaked card, and it turns out that the leaks were correct. So 1 in a Wooburg for the front side saga. 1, you get to exile a non-land permanent opponent controls just straight up. Very cool. To return one other target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, then each opponent discards a card. So you bounce the thing they control and make them discard a card. And then this flips into Okagachi Made Manifest. So 6/6 Dragon Spirit. It is all colors. It is flying and trample. And then when it attacks, the defending player chooses a non-land card in our graveyard, and we return that card to our hand, and Okagachi gets +X+0, where X is its mana value. So they return a, if we only have big things in our graveyard, if they return a 5 mana thing to our hand, Okagachi's an 11/6 with flying and trample. Pretty crazy, pretty strong. Is there going to be a chance or a place where the Wooburg is feasible in a constructed environment that's like, maybe standard or alchemy? Maybe. There's quite a few cards in this set that have Wooburg. Another thing that Kamigawa kind of had going for was the Wooburg stuff. Possibly we could see some support to make these cards more castable. If anything, this is a phenomenal commander card. Next up, Silver Fur Master. So 2 mana for 2/2, so blue and a black, with ninjutsu of blue and a black. And then ninjutsu abilities, you activate, cost 1 less to activate, and then other ninjas and rogues you control get +1/+1. So another lord for rogue tribal and historic, ninja tribal lord as well, which is pretty strong. Also making our abilities cheaper to cast. We've seen the effect that this kind of an ability has. So with Satoru Umezawa, this one being, giving everything ninjutsu is pretty powerful, making things cheaper. So these two really playing well together is great, right? So this is pretty strong. This card's going to be great for the ninja tribal decks, for the rogue tribal decks, as we said. So definitely worth looking at there. Now the next one is super spicy. At the very end of the preview event that they yesterday, we thought everything was over. They started rolling the credits, and then they cut to literally last like 30 seconds of it. They cut to a scene showing off the Tamiyo's complete card, but then they showed these Tamiyo completed Sage. So a Tamiyo Planeswalker, brand new, and a Phyrexian Planeswalker. In the story, Tamiyo gets taken, goes missing. Jin-Gitaxias had her. Surprise, surprise. This is what we get. So, Tamiyo completed Sage. 2 green, and then green-blue Phyrexian mana hybrid, and a blue. That's quite a mouthful. That means a return of Phyrexian mana, which is kind of crazy. But this has the ability completed. So if you pay life for this Phyrexian mana, then Tamiyo enters with 2 fewer loyalty counters. So there is a balancing here to Phyrexian mana. Phyrexian mana, historically one of the most broken mechanics in all of Magic's history. Being able to pay life for mana for using life really as a resource. Now you kind of have to balance it out of, do I take the risk of getting this in and losing the loyalty, getting it in a little earlier, or do I pay that 1 extra mana and get the extra 2 loyalty? Is it worth it? So we have that option. But normally she will come in with 5 mana or 5 loyalty, +1, tap up to 1 target creature or artifact, and then it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step, which feels like a very Tamiyo ability. -X, exile target non-land permanent card with mana value X from your graveyard, and you get to create a token copy of that card, which is pretty nutty. If we get this up high enough, we can start exiling, like if we have dragons in our graveyard, if we have other planeswalkers in our graveyard, we can create copies of of those cards, which is pretty great. And then -7, you create a Tamiyo's Notebook, which is a legendary colorless artifact token with spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, very strong, and draw a card. Pretty good. That's pretty insane. This is one of the planeswalkers that whenever I look at planeswalkers and new ones that come out, how does this interact with things like Doubling Season, or in what I think is going to be probably the way I'm going to try for it is with Vorinclex, the new Vorinclex, the one that doubles up counters as permanents enter, when we put counters on things, right? So when we say, for example, if we were to have Vorinclex in play, we play Tamiyo, we're not paying the complete cost. We're not paying the life for the Phyrexian mana, so it's going to come in with 5, but if with Foreign Collects it comes in with 10, we ultimate right away. We get to have this really powerful continuous draw engine. We also, instead of just doing that, we could just exile a really big thing from our graveyard. Very, very powerful Planeswalker. A lot of fun. I'm expecting to do a lot with this one. This should be fun, so stay tuned. We're going to do some crazy things with this card. So we have the normal version. We have the borderless version, which is very beautiful art. And then we have the Phyrexian language version. Very, very cool. Next up, a couple of uncommons here. So Enthusiastic Mechanaut, artifact spells cost 1 less to cast. This seems busted. We've seen Goblin Necromancer make things like your instants and sorceries 1 less to cast. This seems really busted. This in tandem with the Tezzeret ability, making your artifact abilities cost less, seems really strong. There's probably some kind of blue-red artifact deck to be made here. Next up, we have Jookite Naturalist. So this is a green and a white for 2/2 with lifelink, and enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Also seems pretty good. Probably goes in the Enchantress deck. It is an enchantment creature itself, so that seems pretty good. Great for historic. I think this is a really great card, specifically for that deck, but very cool. Again, cost reduction, mana value reduction, very, very strong abilities here. Next up, Tameshi, Reality Architect. So Tameshi is one of the characters in the story. If you have not read those, go check those out. But Tameshi is a 3 mana 2/3. Whenever a one or more non-creature permanence is returned to the hand, you draw a card. Can only trigger once each turn. Very interesting ability. But then for X and a white, we can return a land that we control to its owner's hand. And then you can return an artifact or enchantment with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Seems pretty good. There's some application here, considering that there is white kind of attached to this. There is some application for possibly for the Azorius deck to the Azorius enchantments auras deck to leverage this. Basically, if we happen to say flat out, we have a creature and we have to get an all that glitters or something back from our graveyard. We can bounce one of the lands we control. We can activate this and just grab one of our enchantments and stick it right back on the battlefield, attach it to one of our creatures. We're set, right? So very, very cool, very interesting card. I think that this could see some play in older formats where kind of the recursion of enchantments and potentially artifacts matters a bit more. And then lastly, we have the soft glow frame treatment for the Kami War. New art and the soft glow treatment on the back for the frame. Looks very nice, really, really cool. Kind of gives like a really like an ancient Asian or ancient Japanese kind of like statue or wall, like a painting or something of that sort. Like very, very, very cool art. Again, Wizards absolutely knocking it out of the park, partnering with Kagado for all the art here. Fantastic stuff. Lastly, we got a couple of lands here to look up. So first off, we have Boseiju Who Endures. So this is a green legendary land, just taps for a regular old green, but it also has channel, so we can discard it, pay 1 in the green, discard a copy of Boseiju Who Endures from our hand. We get to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. That player can search their library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. Still, 2 mana to destroy a thing, an artifact and creature, or artifact enchantment, or non-basic land is really good. Probably not that good in standard. Probably not that good maybe in alchemy. Probably okay in historic. It's insane in modern. Absolutely busted in modern. You do this against Tron, and couple that with a couple of other land destruction effects that you're sitting pretty. You're in pretty good shape. This card is nutty, absolutely insane. I would absolutely say pick one of these up, or pick a bunch of these up, because this is a very, very good card. Next up, we have Secluded Courtyard, an uncommon land. So when it enters it, we choose a creature type, and then we can add 1 mana of any color to cast the creature spell or activate the ability of the chosen type. Creature type that we chose. Pretty cool. Nice tribal support land there. And then lastly, we have Silkenzon, Cradle of Uprising, or Origin of Resistance, whatever you want to call it. It is in, again, I believe in Spanish or Portuguese or something of that sort. But we're just going to go with the Cradle of Uprising. So it's a legendary land, again, and it taps for 1 red. it has the channel mechanic as well. So we discard it, and we create 2 colorless 1/1 spirit creature tokens, and then they gain haste until the end of turn. Cost 1 less for each legendary creature we control. So, meh, kind of an average ability. Probably, I would think this may be one of the worst of skewing towards one of the weaker end of the cards abilities of these lands. So we'll have to see if there's some application for this, but I think generally speaking, the Boseiju is probably the strongest of these lands. So very, very cool. That concludes all the day 1 previews. We will be back tomorrow for day 2. There's going to be a lot of them. So make sure you guys come on over, check out MTGRocks.com, check out our preview gallery so you stay up to date with all these cards so you can take a look at them a little bit more in depth. We'll be adding cards all throughout the week, the weekend, into next week as well. Also, make sure that you guys check out all of our articles and coverage around Kamigawa Neon Dynasty as well. And yeah, that's basically everything. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Make sure you guys drop a like, smash the sub buttons. We'll see you guys tomorrow.